Welcome to Chapter 18, Post-Purchase Processes, Customer Satisfaction, and Customer Commitment. In the consumer decision process, this is the last stage. We've made a decision. Now it's the following action of where we actually implement the solution and solve our original problem. This is the stage when their decision is made and the resulting behavior. Will the consumer selected practice be the solution to that consumer problem they had? Will their decision be enacted as intended? Well, that's another story. But key thing to remember is that consumer decisions are not just ends, but part of other beginnings and middles. So this chapter may cover some endings, but we must remember that they aren't the only part of post-purchase processes. We instead discuss use, disposal, customer satisfaction, and commitment as ways to consider how one decision is part of a longer branch of many decisions. To that end, the concepts we focus on are the many possible decision endings that can take place, and then how one decision process is part of a larger set of processes. And that affects the customer's overall relationship with the consumption or brand. So take note that the skills for this week tend to focus on how the organization must anticipate continued interaction with consumers, say via touchpoints, and be able to select and evaluate metrics that can help us monitor the health of the relationship with the organization. Your product, activity, and problem analyses will help you here. So by the end of the lesson, you'll want to be able to explain why knowing about post-purchase processes is important, discuss the different kinds of post-purchase processes and outcomes, explain the determinants and outcomes of satisfaction and dissatisfaction and what we can do, to conduct our friend the touchpoint analysis with particular attention to those post-purchase activities, and to be able to, again, conduct that product, problem, or activity analysis and make strategic recommendations. So in short, big three takeaways is trace those different resolutions, those endings, those processes, all sorts. Number 2, explain how consumer decisions should be understood as one among many. And 3, be able to explain and know it's important to understand how consumer satisfaction and relationships are major consumption drivers and therefore consumer practice drivers. So on to the main lesson. Let's introduce those key post-purchase processes that can be part of this stage. So big 3, use, disposal, and evaluation. Use is, of course, use, where the product is used and a practice actually enacted for a given situation. Non-use reflects how consumers sometimes do not use the product or do not use it as much even if they had actively sought it out and purchased it or downloaded or acquired or what have you. I'm sure many of you have bought something before and it's now stuck in a drawer somewhere. Disposal reflects the way the product is no longer with the consumer, whether through being used up, being thrown or given away, or so on. Evaluation reflects the way consumers judge their evaluations and effectively their experiences. So they determine their satisfaction with various objects and entities and how this experience adds on to that overall relationship a consumer holds with something or someone. So again, they evaluate their evaluations, and their evaluations are ultimately based on that experience and their judgment. So some questions towards consumers' post-purchase experience might include, how did they use it? Was it reusable? How many times? Where was it stored when not in use? Do they never end up using it or perhaps only use it once? Do they have issues when in use or do they need repairs? How or when did disposal take place? Was it voluntary? What were the related factors? What attributes or the responses to the product and its attributes are at work as they evaluate the product? What particular points or memories do the consumers continue to rely on after that initial judgment? What do they do with those evaluations? Do they let it go? Do they buy it again? Do they rationalize? Do they tell a whole bunch of people? The list goes on to the types of behavior we may learn about, and what they may imply for our plans as strategists. So in sub, 3 big categories of activities we'll cover for the post-purchase stage: that use, disposal, and evaluation. So here's a table to consider the different pathways consumers may take after purchase. And you'll notice that embedded in these are those 3 components of the attitudes: the cognitive belief, behavior, and affect. And again, our friend the touchpoints are key to this stage because there are multiple times in which they might use and evaluate you. So let your touchpoints be their guide. Here's an activity to look at different ways people can record or reflect on their spending. Refinery 29 is a women's fashion/lifestyle type blog. They have a column called Money Diaries where readers submit a week of their spending. It's also exhibits a selection effect when it comes to research like this, so you can see how this column won't be fully representative. So first, you can imagine it won't be representative because the readership of the site skews young and trendy. You're more likely to see minimum to mid-level to high and brand consumption. Second, based on what the poster is willing to share. They may not always share everything that they buy. And third, the very act of writing this stuff down and knowing it will be posted for others will likely impact what they actually did and how they record. That being said, this is a really interesting way to watch how people talk about their spending. What are some different consumption practices you see? What kinds of outlets do they use? What are the ways they account for what they did? So you'll notice they don't just say, this is what I bought. They often give you a reason, a little bit of background. So take a look. Find out how someone spends money in, say, Arkansas, California, Georgia, and others. All sorts of jobs and all sorts of financial health levels. And there's also some international ones too, if you're interested. So a key assumption we make during this stage is how consumers' relationships with you will guide their practices. The last exchange might be done, but your job isn't over. We look at their decisions as part of many decisions within the context of a larger relationship between organization and consumer. So your new goal at this stage is to build a relationship between the consumer and the appropriate entity, practice, or other part. This sets the stage for subsequent decisions. Perhaps they'll purchase again. They'll purchase more. They'll donate in new ways. You tell a friend and so on. So, for example, you're a vet office. You certainly want to give a good visit when the caregiver brings in a new pet for their vaccines. But it's not just this visit. You want to make sure the pet parent knows about any home care for the pet, to check in about other pets' health and vaccination status, and inform the caregiver what other types of care you can provide. The positive attitude they have with you may lead them not only return to you, but make other decisions such as gently talking things over with a friend, not just about your particular practice, but maybe representing good standards of care like vaccines and making sure you get checkups. Or immediately come if there looks like there's a problem. In sum, key part of this stage is that the strategist looks to the end of one decision as part of a larger pattern that sets the tone for the relationship between consumers and other entities. So this brings us to our old friend relationship marketing, which stresses keeping and improving relationships with customers and thinking beyond individual purchase transactions and instead thinking that whole relationship with the customer. So we don't just end the case with a purchase and go, case closed, yep, all done. Our intent is how to build continued exchange, effectively a long line punctuated by interactions. This philosophy came into favor because it's incredibly expensive to find and convert new consumers or to draw consumers away from existing offerings. So we had talked about that before, that we know it's hard to get consumers to unlearn something, much less to learn something new. And so it's easier when they are already on board with you. So what does this look like? Well, think back to some times when no money was exchanged, but you had an interaction with an organization. So maybe flyers and emails from school, politicians, or work. Perhaps it's how a dealership sends cards for both the buyer's birthday and your car's birthday, as they like to joke. Maybe a GoFundMe page or Kickstarter page that provides updates so that followers can know what's going on. So what to do to build these relationships? Well, first, ultimately, you have to provide value, but what this is based on is that consumers see you as a social entity, not just as a hunk of value. It's you are a value provider. And that means rules of reciprocity apply. So if you treat customers well and you're like a good friend, they are nice in return and they buy more from you. They tell their friends. If not, well. So big thing. You have to have something of value, and that's any good service or idea. Next, you got to think long view and customized offerings. Your offerings fulfill needs as part of a longer relationship and set of interactions over time. Linked with this is customizing this from the onset and over time to boost value. This is our example of how Petco pet stores strongly advise new customers to delay adding fish to a tank with an eye toward making sure the fish live and you don't quit trying to keep your pets and say, yeah, they can't keep pets, whatever. Third, relationship marketing means focusing on where or how the value is delivered at all parts of the experience. Touchpoints. All sorts of touchpoints may actually contribute to value. Just as you provide value in all sorts of ways, consumers may just as you provide value in all sorts of ways, customers also envision all these different ways that you might be providing value. Or perhaps not. So consumers may focus in on a particular touch point or symbol, such as use of a product, engage with fellow fans, and maybe just an image. So for example, maybe when they think of your barbershop, they think of the chair. So think of companies that have made similar efforts at building long-term relationships. Do you know any? Perhaps your own? Perhaps something or somewhere you work? So building on this, what types of relationships can consumers have with an entity? Well, relationships come in all sorts. And it's not simply just like and dislike and the strength of such. So here are examples from Fournier's work on brand relationships. We've shown this table before, but it's still very relevant to relationship marketing. There are many facets to the relationship, such as how voluntary it is, intensity of affect, direction of desire, its endurance over time, and so on. Here's the rest of that table. In what ways might you describe your relationship to some of your consumption or brands? Do you have ideas for examples for each of these categories in your own life? So there are many ways we need to manage relationships after exchange. So this includes consumers who are following brands through multiple versions, so different flavors of cookie perhaps, following brand extensions to other product lines, so maybe both cookies and crackers, and increasingly consumers experiencing updates to the product itself, so changes proverbially to a recipe. So managing how consumers respond to changes in a product isn't completely new. After all, there are changes to goods. Services have always been subject to variation and updates, but they tend to be a lot more visible in terms of when there's an end to that transaction, and then it's like, okay, then the next one begins. It's like a new product. Today, we have more kinds of products that can update in new ways. The hallmark is software or software-based devices, thanks to digital transmission, so products like phone apps or devices in vehicles. So now we have to anticipate how consumers follow or disavow when products themselves change. So in the past couple of years, let's use Snapchat. They made changes to their interface in an attempt to make the program easier to use. So they did chronological versus predictive order to snaps and stories. Stories and Snapchats were now on the same page, and the way stories can be rewatched was altered. And Discover page was added with featured and sponsored content. It was reported there was increased engagement and interactions for advertiser content, but previously satisfied users were upset that it felt less intuitive. For example, many teen users like to keep up what they call snap streaks, where you send direct snaps back and forth with a friend over consecutive days for as long as you can. The new design's learning curve meant many teens lost their streaks, which, as we remember from practices and attitudes, a very disruptive event can get users to start looking at competing brands or practices, say perhaps Instagram or other messenger apps. This is also an example of how users may not always appreciate more personalized experiences. Snapchat, Facebook, Tumblr, and other sites have experimented with algorithms that try to prioritize content they think you'll like versus, say, chronological order. Does it work? Well, answers have been mixed and have a lot to say about how integrated use, perceived use, and brand trust can be. Just a few months later, many of the changes were rolled back. In sum, lots of new consumer behavior to be studied because there are many types of products and brand relationships. In this case, we look at how products that may continually update can make for different forms of consumer relationships with each other and that brand. So a key part of relationship marketing is proactive messaging, making sure you have that right message at the right time. So Tide immediately responded when they learned their Tide Pods product became a part of a viral challenge. Tide didn't just go to TV, radio, and newspapers. They also went to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and wherever the customers may be and what works for the message. So our friend Integrated Marketing Communications rules the day still. And social media tools have especially increased how easy it is to respond fast, but also to let consumers and publics come to you. As an example, and the reason for this image here is that entertainment review and community website avclub.com was going to move to Kinja's platforms. They posted an FAQ and hosted an online town hall with users. And so I have that link in the notes right here. I have another link in the notes that also discusses long-term relationship building with your customers. Most notably, extraordinary gestures like delivering Speedos or steak to one or two lucky customers isn't very lasting. They have tips on earning a good reputation using more sustainable business practices, so ones that can be done consistently with every relevant customer. So you don't want to just respond. You want to know when and how to respond. So in sum, relationship marketing is very much in effect, and many of the principles of building relationships with friends and family tend to apply with consumers too. And also, as a little joke, be careful about sounding too intimate as well. You may just sound like you're akin to, as user Sarcasm Said It wrote, a little serial killer-ish. Watch the tone and the frequency. The organization consumer might have a relationship, but they're still aware you're not fully a person either. So, as a little activity to wrap up this section, select a brand, activity, product, or other object of focus and describe what your relationship is like with it. Feel free to use words, pictures, free write. And how would you compare it to another entity? How would you compare it to another member of your household? So, how would their relationship differ? And maybe come up with some recommendations. What could the organization do to strengthen it? Or perhaps weaken? How would a competing organization, again, weaken that relationship or try to supplant their own or maybe do something different? So, with that, the next section we'll talk use and non-use, and let me know if you have any questions and whatever ideas. Hope you have fun with this activity and take whatever ideas from this or whatever, run with them, see where they lead you. Take care.